Great. Hello and welcome to today's online event, part of My Tutor's Champion Schools series, which is a collection of both online and in-person events across the country. Throughout, we've had a really positive response as we address some of the most pressing topics schools face today. Today's topic is the future of tutoring, AI, pupil impact and funding. So quite a lot for us all to get through in the next 30 to 40 minutes. Next slide, please. My name is Alex. I am the Head of Schools Engagement at My Tutor, and I'm delighted to be joined today by some fantastic guests from whom today's real insight will come. So without further ado, let's hand over for some introductions and their take on today's discussion. Dan, I'll start with you.
Hi there, my name's Dan Preston, Assistant Head Post 16 at Aston Manor Academy.
Brilliant. Joy, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Joy Mbakwe. I'm an assistant head at Lillian Baylis Technology School. I'm in charge of community and culture, and today I'm going to be sharing about my personal experience of tutoring and what I think we need to do next to move with the times.
Thank you. And Julian.
Hello everyone. I'm neither a teacher nor a head teacher of any variety. I'm a writer and researcher, and my most recent book was about generative AI, and I'm just going to be sharing a few thoughts around that today. So great to see you all.
Thank you, Dan, Joy and Julian, and I'm looking forward to hearing your views on the future of tutoring during the event. And to our audience, please do submit your questions. Simply message partnerships@mytutor in the chat, and we'll come to those at the end. You can put them through in the message on Zoom. So first, I'd like to help frame this discussion and share some of the topics that we've heard from schools time and time again. Next slide. I know that many of you on the call are not currently working with My Tutor. So as a quick overview, we started working with schools before the pandemic and the NTP and 16 to 19 tuition fund. We've been fortunate enough to work with 1,300 secondary schools, delivering millions of lessons. And I say this because we've worked with schools during a good few periods of change and uncertainty. And we're entering another such period with changes to funding, likely in government and DfE policy, all impacting and already shifting teaching and learning environment for teachers and their pupils. Next slide, please. And what we hear is that there's a new set of strategic challenges. And this list is by no means exhaustive, right? But gives a sense of the incredible complexity school leaders face. We have new budget realities, heightened disengagement from some parents after the pandemic, a promise from Ofsted with their big listen to hopefully hear what schools are saying. There's new reasons for school refusal. We're sometimes competing for pupil numbers. Disruptive behaviour and suspensions in many regions are up. 36% of teachers apparently are actively considering leaving the profession. Exam grades in England are back to pre-pandemic levels. And alongside all of this, you're all creating and maintaining a teaching and learning environment in which pupils can flourish. Next slide. And as we zoom in from these high-level strategic challenges, we all know that teaching is a deeply human endeavour, with all the complexity, fluidity, and unpredictability that comes with it. Next slide. And to make life harder, there's a disparate and disjointed world of suppliers for schools. I went to the Bett Show earlier this year with My Tutor, but also on behalf of a school. And you'll know if you've been, but you enter and your senses are besieged by all these temporary exhibition stands, some of them costing tens of thousands of pounds, trying to entice cash-strapped schools. So understanding who or what will deliver the most targeted, personalised pupil impact is really tough. So the way we think about it is that we have to work with each school to understand your most important strategic questions and adapt what we do to your pupils' needs. Next slide. So the great thing is that tutoring is inherently personal and led by subject specialists. At an individual level, we're looking to add to the classroom teacher's toolkit. And because our tutoring is not one size fits all, we work hand in hand with you to provide the targeted support that you've identified as needed. So in one form or another, tutoring is now a feature in the majority of schools, and it can slot into your school's teaching and learning strategy for a whole host of reasons, whether that's to positively impact pupil outcomes or complement your pedagogical approach and wider school culture. Next slide. And if we think back to some of those challenges that schools face, we want to be ready to pull the right levers to support your school's objectives. And I think this transcends teaching and learning, actually. So, for example, we share how other schools are funding tutoring. It's a complicated landscape. Provide your teachers with training and enrichment opportunities. So the next one of these events, in fact, will be CPD accredited, so you can get points from it. We look to move the needle with our programme leads at your school on getting the more disengaged learners into their tutoring lessons. Together, we measure real impact and return on investment based on your objectives in a way that makes sense for your learners, and using the building blocks of tutoring to provide additional support, such as through our AI assessment tool, which can be used between tutoring lessons. I'll leave you with this. We did a survey, some of you kindly completed a few weeks ago, and in fact, we deliberately had most participants who are not currently working with my tutor. And we asked school leaders to rank reasons why they do or would consider doing tutoring in school. 45% put that they wanted to boost confidence as their first choice. 40% placed grade improvement as the first choice. And when we asked which cohort of pupils are best suited for tutoring, 79% said those needing catch-up. 71% said actually it was emotionally based school avoiders. Around 1 in 2 said SEND pupils, mainstream pupils, and high achievers. And we can share the results after this event, because there's some quite interesting stuff in there actually across the whole survey. But ultimately, what the data reconfirms for us is that there is no universal one-size-fits-all way of tutoring, and we think that's a great thing. And unlike so many of those solutions on show at the Bet Show, or I'm sure hitting your inbox daily, those marketing emails, tutoring is personal, it is specialist, and it's unique for each and every pupil, cohort, and school. So I hope that's a useful summary in a way that we're kind of thinking about the world at the moment. Next slide, please, Lily. Thank you very much. All those photos, by the way, my presentation were from Featherstone High School in West London, who kindly let us do a photo shoot with them. I think they might be on the call today, so shout out to them. Thank you very much. And with all of that, I'm now delighted to hand over to Dan from Aston Manor for his experience with tutoring with post-16 students. Dan, over to you.
Hiya, thank you. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a background really into my tutor. I'm an assistant head. I've been assistant head of Aston Manor, which is in inner city Birmingham, for over 11 years now. Our students live in a very deprived area, and they really value the extra support that we give to our students. But what's really, really important for me over the years is what extra our students can get access to. One of the key things for us is around improving our results. And year on year, we've managed to do that. Over the last couple of years, we've really tapped into our 16 to 19 tuition fund, which is a fund that's available at post-16. And it's really, really important that we've joined with Alex and my tutor. And over the last 2 years now, we have over 30 students accessing the My Tutor programme. One of the big things for us is that our students have a lot of private study time, and we wanted to make sure that that time was valuable and that time was used in the right way. We research many different tutoring programs, but for us, the My Tutor program fits best. The reason being is that some of these students that we work with and the tutors on the My Tutor program are not that much older than our students, which is a real positive for us. Students can really relate to them. Some of our students, it's great with the teachers and supporting them, but it's just a little bit different, the environment. It's just a little bit something different for them to excel. We provide My Tutor with a range of options that our students need to work on. And our members of staff don't always have the time or the capacity to do that. And it's really important that, the 2-hour sessions that we do once a week with our students have been invaluable. And I've got nothing but positivity for the programme, and long may it continue. The student feedback, again, they really value it. They look forward to coming to the sessions as well. And they know week to week exactly what tutors are going to cover with them. Next slide, please. The worry for me at the moment as an assistant head is the funding, and the 16 to 9 tuition fund has been really good for us, really, really powerful for us over the last 3 or 4 years post-COVID, but it's whether that funding becomes to be reduced gradually and where we go from here. Because our students are used to this, they really value the extra funding that they've been given. But in the current climate, I know it's still very much up in the air, as a leader of post-16 as to the amount of funding that we're going to receive to be able to provide this for our students. And as I just earmarked at the start, our students need that support. They don't get that support when they go home or on a weekend, and they're often very busy helping out with tasks at home, helping mum. So we try and provide everything we can in the 9 to 5, so to speak, in the school time that they're here. I'm really pleased to say that 90% of our students go off to university. Many of them are the first in their family to do so. And in the 11 years, we've had thousands of students now excelling and going off, and they come back. We've got students who are medics, doctors, optometrists, and in inner city Birmingham, if you could come over and visit, you'd realise the context of what we're in. It is pretty incredible in what we do, and the destinations we're very proud of them. Next slide, please. For AI, for me at the moment, on the ground level, and a teacher who teaches vocational subjects as well as A-levels, it is a concern for me as to the work that's being produced by some of our Year 12 students, who we don't really know whether it's completely their work. So it's a little bit of the unknown at the moment, and is a slight concern to me. There are many positives with AI, with the research that can be gathered. But for me at the moment, I'm a little bit on the fence with where we can go with this. It's really important to gather the views of people today as well. But I think generally, as a teacher, as a leader in the school, there are many positives for AI, but there are some concerns for me moving forward with our students. And they're obviously one step ahead of us, and me being an older person and not really savvy with the chat GPT. That's quite a common and widespread terminology at the moment. So I'm trying to keep up to speed with everything, but yeah, it'd be really interesting, obviously, to listen to Julian in a moment and his views. But for me, I think there's a place for it. I never think you can take away from the human touch and the human element for me, and that's pivotal, both as a teacher and as a tutor. And our students value that human level. But yeah, be interesting to see where we go with AI, but certainly very interesting. But thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. Really useful overview, and yeah, the reality of funding near peer tutors as well. Really glad that you were able to speak to that, and hopefully Julian can help maybe remove you from that fence in his session a little bit later. I'm now delighted to hand over to Joy to talk about her experience with tutoring.
Sure. Hi, everyone. As I said, I'm an assistant head teacher in charge of community and culture. So that means I oversee really exciting aspects of my school, such as the PSHE curriculum, our student voice, and our achievement year heads. I also lead on the anti-oppression work that we do, specifically specializing in our anti-racist work. Also an English teacher and a former head of English. So quite a kind of broad overview of school. And so I'm just here to share my personal experience of tutoring, what I've seen work in my personal life and what I've seen work in schools, and how we can better partner together and face the future, because we no longer live in the past, right? So I had my first tutor at 6 years old. Her name was Maggie Joyce, and I still remember the quaint road that she lived on, the slightly stale smell in her home, and the way she would leave me to work independently after offering me some support. While I'm not sure if she was the most vibrant tutor, she wasn't exactly young, but she was knowledgeable and she was kind. And from an early age, I came to understand the power of having someone outside of the classroom supporting, teaching, and championing me. And so I had tutors throughout my primary and secondary school education, not because I always needed them, but because my parents understood the profound impact that supplementary education could have on my academic outcomes. And they weren't wrong. My maths tutor took me from a grade C to a grade A in a matter of months. And when I was training to be a teacher, I returned to him at the age of 22. And through his help, I was able to pass the then required test needed to become a teacher. And so my understanding of the power of necessity of tutors is quite intimate, I would say. I understand the value that they add. I believe, as a teacher, I do believe in the power of teachers in the classroom, but there's something to that one-to-one care. Now, as a teacher, a few months ago, I was in the playground on duty and I walked past a lady I thought I'd seen before. And as I turned around to look, she looked back at me and she said my name. And I said, Miss. And it turns out she was my old drama teacher. She was actually, now she's working in my school and she's tutoring one of my students. Now, this student's actually really interesting because he actually petitioned to be in my class. I taught him in year 9, and while he should be in the nurture set, as they call it, he emailed me and kept emailing me and telling me that he wanted to be in my class. He was successful, and now I teach him. And now he's paired with my very own teacher, who is a tutor, and now she's teaching one of my students. What are the chances? And I tell you this story because this unique chain of events has led to a real investment in the success of his tutoring experience. When I'm emailed, I respond promptly. When I hear he's missing sessions, I encourage him to attend and ensure that he knows the value that I placed on what he's receiving. And I appreciate that this is not the experience of most tutors, right? Teachers can often act as a barrier to entry and hinder the very real work that tutors want to do with the students. I believe it's a privilege to have tutors in school, to have them as partners in achieving the outcomes. And I think the cut to funding will once again extend the gap between the richest and poorest students. No young person chooses who they are born to and what privilege they will eventually enjoy in life. And I think that the presence of tutors in school just brings that gap, just moves it ever so slightly together. So what does a future of tutoring look like? I imagine in our school, we'll continue to have tutoring because we really do. Oh, so sorry, the light's gone off in my room. Sorry, I wasn't active, so it thinks I'm not here. I am here, I am still here, everybody. So what do I think that tutors, what can we do? I think tutors and teachers can continue to build relationships together. As I mentioned before, I have a real investment in my student and my previous teacher. But I think it's so important that teachers, respond to emails when you're sent those emails, really see if we can broker a three-way relationships. If tutors, I know that time, people have limited capacity, but if you can attend meetings, if you can make calls home, those can make all the difference in having that human feel that both Alex and Dan have spoken about. I think it's really important for us to meet as a community and create common goals. What are we all working towards? I think this is fundamental to having shared success and having shared ways of working. I think oftentimes the curriculum is here and the tuition is here. And I think sharing curriculum, I think sometimes we can be gatekeepers in education and we don't want to share the resources we have. But if we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, it creates a really powerful force that propels our students to success. And I think finally, I think it's really important as teachers, as educators, as a learning community, that we realize our world is changing, that we need to, as teachers, stop pushing back against technology and realize that AI can really help us and help outcomes, especially if the government aren't going to support us with funding.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. That was an incredibly powerful personal story. And I think talking to the attainment gap there as well, which we know has widened over the course of the pandemic, and we're now in a particularly kind of tricky environment, I think. We're now going to hand over to Julian to talk about kind of exploring AI and how perhaps we can think about it in our schools and with our learners. Before we do, Joy, I'm just going to put a question to you as a segue, I suppose. You spoke a bit about kind of embracing technology and so on. Do you see AI specifically becoming a kind of an increasingly important part of the pupil learning experience?
Oh, definitely. I think what happens in education all the time is that the children, the young people are using technology and we are resisting. We are still trying to use paper, pen, textbooks. So even if we don't think it's going to become integral, it will, because they are using it as a learning tool. I think what we need to think about doing is getting ahead of the curve, as Dan said, trying to stay, in touch with what's happening and using it as a resource as opposed to seeing it as a hindrance.
Brilliant, thank you. Please keep sending in your questions to Lily at partnerships at My Tutor, and we'll get to those at the end. But now, Julian, over to you.
Well, thank you. Although I have to say, I don't think I really want to follow on from Dan and Joy. Maybe for the rest of you on this call, this is your everyday to hear these stories. But hearing Dan talking about his pride at some of those students and hearing your story, Joy, were really powerful for me. So I just kind of want to celebrate that and recognize it. And I actually felt quite emotional about it. So, thank you for sharing that. I fear I'm going to be lackluster against that. And the first thing I have to do is ask Lily, am I driving my slides or are you?
It's me. Next slide, and I will click.
Okay, next slide then, please. So, as I said, I'm a writer and a researcher. So whilst my work is evidence-based, this book, which is available as a free ebook, if you're interested on that link, Engines of Engagement, is a curious book about generative AI. And so whilst my co-authors, Say Schatz, who's a senior civilian scientist in the US military, and Jeff Stead, who is the product lead at my tutor, whilst they both brought a great deal of the rigor around how generative AI works, what I was more interested in was the notion that generative AI is an engine, the same as the engines that powered the Industrial Revolution. And hence these engines will come in many forms: engines of story, engines of song, engines of creativity. And that's what I wanted to explore with you today through these lenses of creativity, comfort, and truth. So the next slide, if we could. In fact, the illustrations for this book, I like to say, are drawn by a human, by this human, in fact, which is why the book was late coming out, because I had to draw 20 of them. But what I did was Jeff and Say created images using the text of the book in one of the generative AI engines, and they gave me the images that they created, and I sat down with a cup of coffee and I drew inspired by those images. And then Say took those and she added texture and color with them. And she also used her skill as a graphic designer to give these 3D elements. So they were a collaboration, but a collaboration with humans, but also with the technology, which was weird. It actually made me feel quite disconcerted. In the last few months, I write every day. I've written 20 books. And only in the last few months have I had to start saying, I write everything myself. I draw everything myself every day. I've had to start being defensive about my creativity. But of course, for me, writing is meant to be hard. Illustration is meant to be hard. I shared with a group of doctoral students the other day who were talking about efficiencies. I said, for me, writing is purgatory, but I need the purgatory because writing is also the thinking and writing is the learning. And when we see the change brought about by these new engines, I think we sometimes run the risk of mistaking efficiency for the process of learning. The next slide, if we could, please. I want to think about these three things: how generative AI impacts our creativity, our comfort, and our truth. So let's start on the next slide with creativity. Clearly, what generative AI does through the various art engines and now movie engines, it lets us type a movie, it lets us speak a poem, it lets us create. It takes out a key step of the process. You no longer have to learn how to use oil paints to create an oil painting. You no longer have to learn how to use a graphic design program to produce graphics. It takes out the step of mastering a skill. But in doing so, we shouldn't forget that it also democratizes many of these things. Oil paints are expensive. Technology is expensive. There is still clearly a barrier of access, but there is an awful lot which is available if we make an assumption people have access to technology at all, very cheaply or for free. And by enabling creativity, it doesn't just have to enable the creation of artifacts, it can enable the dialogue. So the notion that we can create multiple versions of a story, that we can interrogate, that we can rapidly iterate, to be in dialogue with a reflective surface, an artifact that is created, is really a robust way to learn. In fact, really one of the key impacts of generative AI is that it commoditizes high quality dialogue. Of course, I was touched hearing Joy's story about dialogue and encouragement, but it is worth noting that what she was describing was this beautiful person who had been part of her life. Now, dialogue historically has been an expert feature and function, but we can now have high quality dialogue, at least in one level, with a machine, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but nonetheless, that is the experience of it. We can ask for opinions and ideas. we can be creative without having to wield the tools or master the tools of creativity. So clearly, creativity will change. If we jump onto the next slide, this will cause us to reassess what we are measuring and judging. Where is the quality of an artwork? What indeed is the value of art within society? But that's a rather large and philosophical question, whilst what I've heard in a lot of your stories is an engagement in the everyday, in the process of learning and the opportunities that we could find. And I think if we focus on these notions of dialogue with the artifacts, rather than viewing the technology as something that will create a final artifact, we may find opportunities to weave the tools into our existing practice. If we jump onto the next slide to think about comfort, well, of course, we construct our world around us. We create our meaning and we then inhabit it and come to believe it is true. And hence change is uncomfortable. Funnily enough, I've been doing research recently on discomfort and using the opportunity of asking people to write stories of what discomfort means to them. When I feed those stories into Adobe Firefly, one of the art engines, it produces images with tortured people in it, people with really concerned looks on their faces. In fact, you cannot get the art engine to create an image of discomfort that doesn't have a person in it, which I thought was quite fascinating. We understand discomfort is this innately human thing. And of course, when change comes, we feel discomfort. But we should also recognize that our discomfort is because of changes to the familiar. If we jump onto the next slide, we see that we hold on to notions of human exceptionalism. The conversations I hear most often is people saying, you will never replace the human in. And I think that is a dangerous way to think, because the question of whether AI can be creative is rather abstract if people start treating the outputs as if they are creative. It's a philosophical point. At a practical level, if we treat it like a duck and we feed it like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So creativity is already here. These tools are used to write sermons, to write poems, to write love letters. Human exceptionalism makes us believe there is something special in the human, and indeed there is, but we shouldn't mistake that for simply the things that we've always done before. And finally, on the next slide, if we think about truth, of course, there are issues with AI, but we have to ask which of those are solvable. Questions of bias and questions of truth come to the fore. Bias is essentially a technically solvable problem, so we mustn't mistake the tools and the instances we see today for how things will be forever. We're already on the 5th release, I think, of ChatGPT within a year. Things are moving incredibly fast. And as for truth, well, there's an uncomfortable notion that truth can be what we need it to be in the moment. Clearly, some things like our scientific methodology will produce a truth that says this thing weighs a kilogram, and if I post it to you, it will still weigh a kilogram. But other types of truth, the truth that we use every day, what do I believe, who do I trust, how do I find pride, these things are true too, even though they are unquantifiable. We may have to understand that the landscape of truth is becoming broader, and that to all intents and purposes, people will use the outputs from these types of systems in order to take action with these rather imperfect versions of the truth. So if we jump onto the next slide, which is the only one I didn't draw just for today's session, the notion that knowledge is under construction and always should be is important. The notion that learning is not a thing that we achieve, it is a thing we do throughout our lives, and that learning is largely a process of breaking ourselves, of fracturing what came before and using the broken pieces to create new mosaics, and sometimes lending those tiles to each other to help other people create beautiful pictures. So I guess my encouragement is to keep our knowledge under construction, and when we find certainty, to celebrate it and then immediately look beyond it into the shadows to follow our curiosity. So thank you for inviting me along today to share a few thoughts.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julian. And some incredible artwork there as well. So thank you for taking us through that. Truly fascinating. We've had quite a few questions in. We have probably just shy of 10 minutes to go through a few of them. I don't think we'll get through all of them. And thank you to everyone who's joined and taken time out at the end of the school day. Julian, I thought I'd start with one for you. So with your own exploration of it and looking back on that, what would you advise teachers for preparing students for an AI world and perhaps their first exploration of it?
I mean, the simplest. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think the simplest thing, obviously, is to understand how we're supervising, but to use it to explore imagination, to start to understand the language that we can use to create images, to create words, and how we can ask for more depth. You know, you can ask generative AI to plan you a perfect trip to Berlin, but you can ask it to produce an itinerary. You can ask it to do something, and you can ask it to explain the steps it took to get there. You can ask it to create an artwork, but then ask it how it would improve or change that artwork. You can ask it to critique your work, to give you constructive feedback. You know, just building the vocabulary of interaction will be important. And I suspect to celebrate some of it as well, to accept that we will have to deal with the challenges of cheating, but to understand that sometimes the difference between cheating and learning is a social construct, to understand how we can recognize to some extent the empowering nature of these technologies, as well as its threats to some of our legacy conceptions of truth and judgment.
Thank you. Very interesting. Just have a slightly different question. One of the other topic areas for Dan and Joy. I'd love to hear more about how you get buy-in from your school community, including parents with tutoring. Dan, do you want to take that first?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, more and more of our students now, initially, Alex, it was students that were just slightly underachieving in their grades. And I know that was quite a popular percentage earlier on when you went through that. But more and more now, it's word of mouth and students talking to each other about, you know, this extra tuition that they can have access to. We've also at parents' evening, parents are coming over and asking us about, you know, what we can do, what we can provide for their for their son, daughter. So for us, initially it was to try and improve our grade, to try and improve the understanding of students in particular concepts. To begin with, it was in biology and chemistry, but now, you know, I'm pleased to say we're covering 8, 9 different subjects. And like I said before, we are looking to grow to over 40 of our students, and there's a demand for it now. There's a clear demand from parents and students that this does work, and anything we can do in inner city to support our students to move on to the next destination is just a positive for us.
Brilliant. Thank you. Joy, over to you.
I think parents are always on board, and I think irrespective of class, parents love supplementary education. They know that it is a way to further ensure success. I do think that there are times where our students don't always buy into the idea of having a tutor, and I do find that quite difficult. I think sometimes in my particular context, they are so inoculated from the world as it is and their place in the world, given their color and class and socioeconomic background, they don't know the barriers and the disparities between them and their counterparts who don't look like them. And so without telling them that, because that of course would then become a self-fulfilling prophecy, it's hard to get that buy-in that, hold on, this is actually your way to kind of, you know, equaling, I don't know if that's possible, but giving you a way in. And sometimes because we offer it obviously for free, you know, when things are free, often, unless it's food, sometimes people don't enjoy it as much, you know. And so I think that is the biggest barrier from my observation. It's making sure students get there, attend sessions, see the value. And, you know, with children, it's often in hindsight that they come back and they're like, oh, wow, I had access to it. And sometimes it is too late. So I would say that's the biggest barrier.
Thank you. We've got another question to Dan and Joy, but pertaining to Julian's talk. Has it changed your mind in any way around AI or given you extra food for thought to perhaps take back to the classroom?
Well, for me, listening to Julian, really insightful. I've never thought it was a negative. I was kind of on the fence, but I do think there are ways that our students can tap into this and utilise it. And it's not just that element of, oh, we're just a little bit worried when we're marking their coursework as to have they actually produced this piece of information. And I do think there's a discussion around the research and how they come to some study work that they produce, because a lot of it is around the research and gathering the intel. So for me, I remember back to my school days, I think it was Ask Jeeves. I think things have improved an awful lot since then, but things have always been around. But yeah, it's been really insightful for me to listen to Julian and his views on this.
Yeah, I really did enjoy it. Thank you so much, Julian. I think one of the things that really struck me was this idea that cheating is socially constructed. And when children tend to want to, if you will reprimand a child for cheating, but then you'll tell them to share ideas in the next breath. And sometimes under test conditions, we create this idea that you are wrong for not knowing the right answer and for trying to share ideas with your friend. I think one thing that I'm really challenged about is, you spoke about sermons and poetry and love letters being AI being used to create these things. And my instinct was to say, oh, but there's value in doing it as as people. And you spoke to that human exceptionalism, and I'm really kind of struck by this idea of what is the use of what we are teaching, what makes what we are teaching unique. Are there inherently transferable skills that we are teaching our students that they can take into the workplace? And I think if we can reframe our ideas about what is valuable, then AI becomes a tool, right? Because it's not about just having the right answer, which is what we're teaching in school. It's about the different ways to get there and how to be creative in the process. So thank you very much, Julian. I thought very, very inspired. Thank you.
Thank you. And Julian, a question for you around AI. What's next for it? So I think you spoke to creativity. We obviously know about ChatGPT, but where's this technology going?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I feel I should just sort of respond to Dan and to Joy there. That we have to change our systems of where we find value, because when we assess for artifacts and answers and truth, we miss the pleasure of curiosity and exploration. And people are using this, billions of times a day to make things easier. But, a badly written, in the book we talk about this, a badly written Mother's Day card is, of course, of far more value than a perfectly produced Mother's Day poem. But we have to sort of change our metrics of value. What do we value? When do we value the human over the efficiency? So where this is going, I mean, the first wave is going to be people trying to make a lot of money and sell us stuff based around efficiency, things we used to do that can now be done much easier. That's what I do. I'm now able to do sentiment analysis on every program that I run super easily. Narrative analysis, stuff that used to be difficult, complex, hard, I can do easily. Where it's going to go, and I'm an optimist, it's going to decimate our systems of education, particularly higher education. It's going to decimate many of the jobs, and it's going to come at great cost to the least enfranchised members of our society. I have no doubt. Things that we hold to be true will crumble to dust in short order under the onslaught of these technologies. Where will we go ultimately will depend on our ability to come to terms with that and have the responsible dialogue around it. That won't come from government. It won't come from regulators. So, I'm kind of an optimist and a realist. I think we have to move beyond convenient narratives about ethics and bias, which may be true, but do not serve us in how we will construct this new world.
The changing environment. We're at time. We're just over time, in fact. So huge thanks to Dan, Joy, and Julian for joining us. Thank you to everyone who attended for taking some time out of your day. We know quite a few of you emailed in asking for the recording, so we'll certainly send it over to everyone as well. We have our next event on the 25th of April. That one will be CPD accredited as well. And if you want to hear about our events, scan the QR code or search for Champion Schools Club and sign up, and we will make sure that you're the first to hear about them all. But for now, just to say thank you again to our speakers and for everyone coming along, and to Lily for organising all of this. And I'm sure we will see you all again soon. Thank you.